first let's look at signal generators on synthesizers. So we can actually break this down into two subcategories. So first we have our audio signal generator. And this is things like oscillators, wavetables, samples, really anything that's providing the raw material for your synthesizer sound to be based on. We also have control signal generators. And these are things like the keyboard, the wheels, the modulation and pitch bend wheels, the low frequency oscillator or LFO, and the envelopes. And these are all things on the synthesizer that control other aspects of what the synthesizer is doing. We'll get more in depth into these modules further along in the course. So next we have what we referred to earlier as our Resonator section, but we're now going to call this the Modifier section. So the Modifier section, not surprisingly, is what modifies the audio signals that are coming from the signal generator section. So for modifiers on a synthesizer, we have things like the VCA or voltage controlled amplifier. We have the filters and any sort of audio effects, things like saturators, bit crushers, anything that can be considered sort of an audio effect. So just to recap, on synthesizers, we can really sum up all of this stuff into two main categories: signal generators and signal modifiers. So we're going to take a look at some classic synthesizers now and see if we can identify the signal generators and the signal modifiers. So let's take some time to look at those two categories we just talked about, signal generators and signal modifiers, and see if we can locate them on some classic synthesizers. So what we're going to start with is the Moog Model D. This is hands down one of my all-time favorite synthesizers. And it's actually a very historic one as well, because this was really sort of the first portable keyboard synthesizer. Prior to this in the 60s, we would have been dealing with large modular systems with walls of knobs and cables. So this was one of the first synthesizers that a musician could tuck under their arm and take to a gig. So let's take a look at the Moog's panel and see if we can find the components that would fall under the signal generator category. So actually, if you take a look at the panel, you can see that things are more or less broken up into sections. So that should give us a pretty good hint as to where to go looking. Another good hint with synthesizers, which is a trend that the Moog kind of started, is that you can sort of follow your signal flow from the left side of the instrument to the right side, sort of like the way we read from left to right. So first, let's see if we can find our signal generators. So I don't see anything on the panel that says signal generator necessarily, but I do have these things here that say oscillator. So here we have our three oscillators, which are the signal generators for our Moog. The audio signal generators. So these are generating the signals that are being processed by the rest of it. So let's see if we can find some other types of signal generators, because remember, we've got two subcategories. So we already found the audio signal generators. Now let's see, is that all the audio signal generators? Well, we've got one more over here, and this is a white noise generator. So basically it makes the shh white noise sound that we can mix in with our oscillators. So that pretty much covers the audio signal generators on the instrument. Now let's see if we can locate some control signal generators. So some of you might have noticed that over on the left, we see something that says controllers. So that probably gives us a good hint as to what this section's all about. So we have our pitch bend and modulation wheels. So as I mentioned before, these are types of controllers. And actually the Moog was the first to feature these. We have our keyboard, which is another controller. Now I had mentioned something called the LFO, or low frequency oscillator. Now there's nothing on the Mini Moog that says LFO necessarily, but all of our oscillators have a position on the switch that's just labeled low. So as sort of a cost-saving measure, the Mini Moog uses the oscillators to double up as LFOs. And to make it an LFO, we just simply hit the low range, and it will produce control signals that we can route to other parts of the instrument. Now let's see, what else do we have for control signals? Well, we also have our envelope generator section. And you can see that there's two of these, and they're exactly the same. And they say attack, decay, and sustain. So these are things that generate control signals that change over time. So this is how we shape the time characteristics of our sound, whether we want a fast attack or a slow attack. And again, we're going to get much more into that when we cover envelope generators. That basically covers the control signal aspect of the Mini Moog. Now let's see if we can find some signal modifiers. So again, our eye is drawn immediately to this section that is labeled modifiers. And it's kind of confusing because we have these envelope generators sitting here, which are technically not modifiers. They're control signal generators that control the modifiers. So that's why they put it in the same section, since this is all kind of relevant to what this stuff does. But it's important to remember that difference between modifiers and controllers. So we also have our mixer section here, which is a type of modifier. We can use this to modify the volume of each of our oscillators. So you see we've got oscillator 1, 2, 3, and we've got the volume for each one here, along with a switch that we can turn it on and off with. And the same for the white noise. So this would be a way to modify our volumes, mix the oscillators in different ratios to get our different sounds. Of course, we have the filter section, which is another type of modifier. This is what's called a low-pass filter, but we'll get into all the different filter types in the filter class. Finally, we have the VCA, voltage-controlled amplifier, and you can see this is where the volume knob is. We've got the main output switch. There's also a headphone output too. So the VCA is, again, what's gating our notes. It's what's turning the sound off when we don't want sound. And this is being controlled by this signal generator here, this envelope. So we've already found quite a few different modifiers and control signal generators and audio signal generators on the Mini Moog. So just to recap, we looked at signal generators. So that's two kinds of signal generators: our audio signal generators, like our oscillators, our control signal generators, like LFOs, envelopes, wheels, and keyboard. And we also talked about modifiers. So we have modifiers that change the audio signals, things like filters and VCAs.